Happy politics and welcome to your favorite BC politics podcast, and also the one that your favorite politicians listen to. Trust me, they do. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
It's Jordan Vateman, Vice President Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the mighty ICBA, live from Burnaby.
The mighty Orca, the mighty ICBA.
We're mighty all over. We're mighty all over. You're right. People do listen to the show, which always astounds me because, really it's just a chance for me to bend your ear for, 45 minutes-ish. But thank you to those listeners, especially to, of course, our good friend in the bowels of the legislature typing this out for cabinet ministers who will never read it.
This is true. Just get a transcription service. I'm going to tell you this every week until you do it because, man, there are better ways to spend your time. Although, of course, if you're just enjoying listening, then... sit back and enjoy, get your coffee ready. We're going to talk about some interesting things today. Where should we start today, Jordan? Last week, the House was in session. There was I think it's fair to say the opinion of the media and the commentariat is that question period has been a little more interesting lately. It's been a little more effective from an opposition point of view, from both the BC Liberals and the BC Greens, to be fair. Yesterday, there was an interesting run of questions about a treatment facility for the carrier Sakani that was much requested and badly needed. And it was turned down because of the ALR, the Agricultural Land Commission, saying that it shouldn't be built on ALR lands. It should be a farm instead. By the government's own admission, this is a badly needed treatment center, and people are upset. What did you think about that, Jordan?
Well, first of all, I think you're right. I think the BC Liberals have been doing a very good job in question period. They're asking questions that are clearly getting under the Premier's skin from time to time, which is an important part of it. He's dropping more mans and more little insults about people across the way and winking and all sorts of non-Premier-like behavior. Things that we don't expect from Premier Dad, but that we expect from Premier us versus them. It's nice to know that he was the one that was elected. You're right. The Agricultural Land Commission.
Can I interrupt on the tells because I tweeted about this and I got some
please
good reaction, including some direct messages from people who couldn't say it publicly, saying, "Okay, that was hilarious," and it wasn't a devastating insult to the Premier, but he's a much observed person. I said the joke was I was going to play a game of poker with him and base my strategy entirely on what he calls me. If I say, Premier, how's your hand looking? He'd say, mind your own hand, Maclean. He's feeling pretty confident. You should probably just fold because he's probably doing well. Mind your own hand, man. Well, neutral. He's feeling casual, but you can proceed with caution. Mind your own hand, dude. Whoa.
Yeah. All in.
All in the house. He's not feeling good. And so, hey, he is a intensely observed person. He has his tells, and I think those are pretty clear ones.
Yes, yes, and thank you to those who DM'd Maclean and with their own little spins on that. That's it's very true. The Agricultural Land Commission. What can we say about them? As a former township councillor in Langley, BC, where the right to farm legislation was put in place specifically for Langley and Delta, enacted there long before the rest of the province had to live with the unintended consequences of that legislation. I have many, many opinions on the ALC, and very few of them are good. Look, Carrier Sakani, when the Tyee, noted NDP critics, the Tyee, come out with a long-form piece essentially shredding this decision not to allow the Carrier Sakani folks to open a treatment facility on ALR land. By the way, this is close to Vanderhoof, in case you're wondering where exactly we're talking. They have a problem. I mean, the Tyee is noted for its love affair with 1970s NDP policies, such as the Agricultural Land Commission. Andrew McLeod, who I adore in real life, I think he is a really smart guy and one of the nicest people
he is indeed
you will ever meet.
He's that as well.
But when it comes to 1970s NDP policies, he's in his disco gear and Saturday Night Fevering away. He'll love that. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. The ALR is... the positive intention of the ALR is to protect farmland, and we get it. We want to protect farmland. We have to have, although it's become more about aesthetics in a lot of places than it is about farming, we have to have farmland in order to produce food, produce crops, raise livestock, all those different things. The problem is there are a lot of uses where you need space. And, the ALC has become more and more narrow in how it interprets its own rules and makes it more and more difficult for farmers or farm owners to use that space for various things. Carrier-Secani is a great example. There's a farm in South Langley called Wagner Hills. BC Housing, under the BC Liberal government, allowed it to become a treatment center for women who are dealing with alcoholism and other issues, drug addiction. And it's been a great success. They have a little farm market. The women farm the property. They have gardens. I've been there many times. It's a beautiful spot, wonderful people, and it's doing really valuable work. But it's on farmland. And I can't remember exactly. I should know this because I was on council at the time. I can't remember exactly if it was an ALC property or not. But it's that kind of rural pastoral setting, which is exactly what you're trying to do, try and disconnect people who are dealing with addictions. You want to get them out of their normal urban environments, put them somewhere where they can refocus the mind. There's my wife and I were joking about this the other day. There's articles about forest bathing, which is where when you're stressed, you walk through a forest, and there's something about the natural environment, something about the rural environment as well that changes your heart, changes your mindset. It physiologically has an effect on you for the good. So, the number one crisis in BC, other than COVID, is overdoses, opioids, mental health, and addictions. We have to get around on this, and if it means sacrificing a few acres near Vanderhoof, noted crop-producing Vanderhoof, for a treatment center like this, let's do it. And then you add the Indigenous layer over top of it. How does UNDRIP work on this? Is my question. We should talk about Adam Olson's masterful performance in getting part of a bill scuttled or paused, which rarely happens with a majority government, especially when as ham-fisted as the NDP tend to be, having just run an election saying that they were being held back by the nefarious opposition parties who want things like good government and transparency. How does UNDRIP fit into this as well? Indigenous peoples are more likely, statistically speaking, to deal with addiction issues, they are very much at risk. And we should be doing a dozen of these healing centers, not killing them. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's a very narrow focus of the Agricultural Land Commission, but don't let the BC government off the hook. Ellis Ross, I thought, had a pretty compelling statement from the chief involved in this particular discussion, saying that, government got involved, government stopped this. So there might be something there. More Wagner Hills farms, more of that type of treatment center, please. It works, and I don't understand. Now, the funny thing was yesterday's question period. Horgan, who's not exactly noted for his details, he basically folded immediately on this, and he had no clue about Carrier-Secani. He had no clue what they were talking about. He immediately deferred to the Minister of State for Mental Addiction. Or is it Minister of State or full Minister for Mental Health? Anyways.
The Minister.
Sheila Malcolmson. And, I found that interesting. Now Horgan's not a detailed guy. I don't think any of us would say that. He's a big picture guy. But as a premier, you can big picture bluster a little bit on this before handing it off to the minister. So I suspect there was an uncomfortable conversation after.
Yeah, he started with, well, I'll meet you, you being Shirley Bond, who asked the question. And then, you're right, deferred to the minister to sort of trying to explain how this happened. But you've already gotten you'll get a meeting on it. But the explanation was that it was the ALC. I always confuse ALR and ALC in my head. And let's not introduce AOC into this.
The ALC runs the ALR. It's the same thing.
Yeah. But I always get them wrong in my head. And the explanation was it was them. Well, it was them that kiboshed it, not us, the provincial government. And the retort was, well, that's great, but the people don't perceive it that way. They perceive it as a branch of the provincial government trumped the other branch of the provincial government. The average person just sees the government as an amorphous blob and doesn't make these distinctions. And, to say, well, this branch said no to this branch, and technically they have the authority, the average person just kind of looks at you and goes, but you're in government. Just make it happen.
You're the
Everyone
premier.
agrees we need this.
Yeah, you're the premier, you're the cabinet. We just gave you a majority mandate to deal with issues like mental health. Make it happen. And they're not wrong.
Yeah.
Like, cabinet could do it tomorrow, no IC, and it's done. So, and like I said, there's so many layers there. Like, isn't it convenient that, on projects the NDP don't like, UNDRIP is very much front and center as a stall tactic on that. But, on projects that are important for important for Indigenous people, all of a sudden UNDRIP is just kind of quietly forgotten. Like, so it's such a weird, hypocritical thing.
If we were at war with a hostile foreign power, killing half as many people as losing half as many people as we are losing to the opioid crisis, if you don't think that we wouldn't give a few acres of land to the Canadian forces for training, anything, that kind of thing, of course it would happen in a heartbeat because it's a war and we need to do these kinds of things. Well, the opioid crisis is well past war levels of human loss. And so, yes, a few things like a few acres of farmland and probably not particularly high yield farmland near Vanderhoof, as you pointed out, seems to me like a more than acceptable trade-off.
Yeah. If you want to read more about my thoughts on the ALC, I wrote a piece for the Orca maybe a year and a half ago. And essentially, the ALC was took a farmer to court, saying they didn't have the right to do a certain thing because they had 2 acres of land, more than 2 acres of land. They had 1.9996 acres of land. And the ALC is the only government organization in the world that thought 1.9996 was more than 2. And sure enough, they lost in court. And in fact, they were embarrassed in court by the judge, who was like, it's a simple math. 1.996 is less than 2. Like, this is not a hard thing. So I have very little time for the ALC. I find them very rigid, very unbending, very myopic in their view. I find that they tie the hands of farmers. We'll talk about another issue on this in a second, but they tie the hands of farmers. They don't allow farmers to do what it takes in order to survive. I think of Milner Gardens in Langley, which has a very popular Christmas light show, and the hassle that they have to go through in order to get a permit to try to have a Christmas light show that helps fund the rest of their farm operations for the rest of the year. Weddings on farmland. Just let's find a way to help farmers have as many revenue streams as possible instead of trying to just freeze in time in the 1970s as if that was the pinnacle of human civilization.
I assume you are referring to, talk about another similar issue. I might skip ahead and we'll come back to the Von Palmer piece. You're referring to Deanie Moore's piece on Friday about actually a very interesting case, regardless of where you come down on it, that probably deserves more attention in BC than it's getting. It has to do with the province's largest landowner, who you may have heard of. He owns the LA Rams, Denver Nuggets, Colorado Avalanche. And he makes a very convenient villain, I think, in this. His name is Stan Kroenke, although his first name is Enos, as I learned when I was looking all this up.
Get out of here.
It is. It's Enos. His name is Enos Stanley Kroenke, and he goes by his middle name, and we can all understand why.
I would too.
And that's so cheap of me making fun of a man's name.
Come on, man.
It stood out. Anyway, originally, his ranch, which is huge, had lost in the BC Supreme Court against a local fish and game club that said that they were being impeded from fishing in his lake, which even Kroenke's lawyers agreed by the letter of the law are common property. But he went to the Court of Appeal and is now able to bar access to the roads. So technically they are legally allowed to fish in the lake, but they can't get there. And so this brings up an issue called the right to roam, in which in many other jurisdictions, people have the right to go through uncultivated land. It has to be uncultivated. They can't camp. They can't cause damage. They can't leave garbage or anything like that. But they're supposed to be able to get to and from crown lands for their own purposes. And this goes back to King Henry II in the 13th century. Jordan, you and I talked about this offline. You have a different take on this, and I think it's one that's worth sharing.
Yeah, first of all, I'd never heard of Kroenke until this story, so it shows how up-to-date I am on the Colorado Avalanche and LA Ramses of the world. But, okay, let's have some discussion about this. So, it will come as a surprise to no one that I am a believer in personal property rights. And you better have a darn good reason as government to intrude upon those personal property rights, whether it's my right as a homeowner, whether it's Maclean's right as a condo owner in beautiful Victoria, whether it's even, Stan Kroenke, evil Colorado Avalanche owner. Apparently, I mean, I don't know why it's evil to own the Colorado Avalanche.
It's not.
It's not. So, but you're right. It's like the perfect foil for the little guy on this. So it becomes like
American billionaire, like it's straight from Central Casting.
Exactly.
It's like a Hallmark movie.
Exactly. Plus the LA Rams, and they sacked Russell Wilson, and we love him. Russ is fine. Okay. Here we go. I don't understand. This idea of right to roam sounds wonderful in principle. It might have been wonderful in 1217, but we've come a long way since then. So you have a lake in the middle of acres and acres and acres, hundreds of acres, thousands of acres of property. And a group of people say we should be allowed to fish in that lake because it's quote unquote crown land. But the crown never reserved any right to get to that piece of land. At some point the crown owned all the land and sold it off. And one of the things they sold off was all the land around that lake. So there's no pathway. So what we're saying to this private property owner, a farmer, by the way, even if he's a rancher, even if he owns the Colorado Avalanche, it is a farm. It's a ranch. And we are saying, no, we need you to provide access to this lake through, I don't have the exact map, but it could be miles of property in order to get there. We want you to do that, number one. Number two, if anything goes wrong, who's on the hook? Let's say, some folks go out there and dump paint in the lake. Is that Kroenke's responsibility to clean up? You really think the Crown's going to be rushing there to, save that little lake? Of course not. It'll, never think. What if there's garbage left on the shore? Is that his? What if there's garbage left along the path? Okay. What if someone gets hurt on the path? Who's liable for that? There's all these different things. So at one point we have the Agricultural Land Commission, which would not allow. You can't even put fill on a property. You can't even build a berm.
That's true.
You can't dig a stream. You can't dig a ditch without getting ALC permission. You can't build a second house. You can't put a trailer. You have to get ALC permission. But now not the ALC, but now you have the government on the other hand saying, no, everyone should be allowed to traipse through there and nothing. Just take this out of the context of a giant farm and put it into your own life. We have a house. We built a backyard ice rink for 3 days during the great frozen winter of early 2021 here. Should people have had the right to traipse through my yard in order to go to the rink or, no, of course not. You would never allow people to traipse through your yard. Or should I have the right to go and, declare that, Maclean's fireplace, that is now Crown property and I need to warm myself there and just kind of be able to walk? No, you wouldn't do it. But for some reason on this stuff we do. It's not like we're lacking for lakes in British Columbia that you can have access to. It's not like it's the only lake. There's thousands of lakes. It really bothers me that, on one hand, we tie farmers' hands completely up and say you can't even, dig a ditch without getting permission from the LC. And then on the other hand, we're like, but we want you now to, allow the public to wander willy-nilly through your property. What happens if a bull runs one of these guys? What happens if, someone breaks a leg? There are so many liability issues. And, Kroenke as a zillionaire would be, a very juicy target to sue in all those situations. So, not that I'm going to stand up for billionaire real estate tycoon Stan Kroenke, as Dean refers to him, but
I mean, he is that.
Yes,
to be fair.
But he can also have a private ranch. Just picture in your mind, for those of you like Jody Vance, shout out Jody, who've been watching Yellowstone. Think of all the time, there's entire seasons built on of Yellowstone built on the idea of tourists jumping a fence to get a nicer picture by the scenery in Kevin Costner's ranch. That's a murdering offense in Montana, apparently. I'm not saying we have to be as crazy as Americans, but if we want to access this lake, go to the private homeowner or private landowner and make a deal. Do an easement. Do make a deal. Don't just expect that should be in place. So I just have real problems where we constantly see this erosion of personal property rights. It's not just the ALC, it's other groups too. So a farmer, I know a farmer in Langley some farmers in Agassiz and Hope, they dug ditches 50 years ago, their families did, in order to irrigate their land and then to drain it. And now those ditches are deemed fish-bearing streams by DFO. And they're not allowed to actually farm within 15 feet of the banks of those ditches. They're not fish-bearing streams, they're ditches. There's not been a fish in that stream, that ditch in years, ever. But, now they can't, those kind of regulations, this is what drives farmers bananas, and, rightfully so. There you go.
That was a very articulate rant. And the only quibble I will have with you is that you are talking about an erosion of rights when it started with a legal principle established in the 1200s. But still.
Not in Canada, though. We don't have this law in the books in BC.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the Westminster system was not yet established in Canada in the year 1200.
That's right. Exactly. Point one by me. No, this law has never been enforced. It's never been on the books. It's never, Andrew Weaver tried to bring it in, and it died on the order paper, which, Doc Weaver, despite his bromance with John Horgan, couldn't even get through. I would advise the BC government, proceed with caution here. Let's not, just because you have one convenient villain, go and negotiate access.
To be fair, we're talking about two different court rulings too. So it's not like this is being debated in the Premier's office. It was a Supreme Court ruling and then a Court of Appeal ruling. So we'll see what happens next. But I mean, it's legal wrangling at this point.
Well, yes, and that's my favorite kind of wrangling. Just kidding.
The only kind that counts these days.
Yes, exactly.
There's another kind of wrangling that counts, and that is I'm talking about Vaughn Palmer's piece from either yesterday or the day before. Very interesting interview that Bonnie Henry gave over the weekend. Oh, you have your book. I would like to. I have not yet seen that. I haven't even seen the cover.
Well, you should order it on Amazon.
They chose the right title.
You should order it on Amazon. It'll arrive, or your local bookstore. Go down to Powell's and. Not Powell's. That's Oregon. What's the one in Monroe's? Go down to Monroe's.
Monroe's. I will go down to Monroe's, and I will. I feel like that's probably the kind of book that's on back order in the local bookshops in Victoria. Having said that,
I bet you they have signed copies.
They might actually. Huh. Interesting.
I bought George Abbott's book from there, and it was a signed copy. And George Abbott makes me gag at the best of times, but the fact that I have a signed copy of his ridiculous history rewriting screed against the new era. The books I buy. If anyone thinks I'm just living in my own little bubble, no. I'm buying the books that I hate too. So.
George Abbott is not the person we were going to talk about there. It was Dr. Bonnie Henry's interview in which she admitted, I gather not for the first time, but the first time we're really talking about it, that she wishes she had clamped down more in October.
You think?
And that's an interesting time frame for a couple reasons. The first of which is that before October, BC was still doing relatively well in terms of infections and hospitalizations and deaths. And then it went south very, very, very quickly. And the other thing that was interesting about October is we were having a provincial election at that time, a snap provincial election. Now, I'm going to say this off the top. And so it's said, and I'm not accused of anything. Dr. Bonnie Henry was very clear that she does not think that the election had anything to do with it. It had to do with her disagreeing with advice she was given by local health authorities who thought that they had the situation well in hand. And I believe the quote was, she should have trusted her spidey sense, her words. And that the election was a coincidence. It is a big coincidence, and I am not one to dispute Dr. Henry, but it is awkward, I will use that word, awkward that we are put into a position by having a snap election during a pandemic, that we are now having to talk about inaction during the election that the provincial health officer now says was a mistake, was a coincidence.
So Dr. Bonnie's had her spidey sense was tingling. Well, let me quote Mr. Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And I think what we're seeing here is you talk about history being rewritten in one place. We're talking about a little bit of history rewriting here. Imagine, Maclean, you have a team. Oh, imagine your team of us writers and contributors, although I haven't written a lot lately, I apologize. Writers, I've been busy. Writers and contributors to the Orca. And something comes and you don't like it, but you make the call, you publish it. I just can't imagine you then going back, getting a complaint about it and being like, well, my spidey sense was tingling. I probably shouldn't have done it. But Bateman, he got it. He sent it in, and so I published it.
Purely hypothetical.
What a wonderful form of leadership that is, right? Like, come on, Dr. Bonnie. She kind of threw these poor people under the bus. Part of me is name names. Which health authority person don't you trust? Is it Dr. Penny Ballum? Because that would be hilarious to me. Anyways, I find that kind of thing. But this constant dancing around the election timing, it just, for those of us who do not see eye to eye with the NDP ideologically on many issues, it just reinforces to us how we feel like Dr. Bonnie is a little bit in their pocket. And how tight the relationship is between Dr. Bonnie, who's supposed to be an independent, person making these things, and the NDP government. It's like hand in glove. Now, I haven't read her book yet. Frankly, there are people out there on Twitter who will be parsing this like it's the Holy Scriptures and trying to find every little inconsistency between what she says now and the action she took. And God bless them for that. I can't bring myself to do that kind of deep dive into it, but yet I'm sure someday we will. But I just don't see how you can divorce the election from it. The election it wasn't about catching COVID in the Elections BC lineup. It was never about that. It was about the social license and the social permission for people to relax in the fall. And, John Horgan going to the polls to say, in order to further the job ambitions of one person, John Horgan, was a selfish act. And it shredded an agreement that he had with the Green Party. It broke the trust that was built up with people on all sides of the spectrum. And it was social permission to be like, well, I guess we're through this. And I just don't see how she can continually try to put that on the shelf, like, oh, don't look at that, it's actually this. And now to blame, faceless health experts for it, I don't know, that's not... Dr. Bonnie gets a lot of great press, a lot of gratitude from people, but no one's perfect. And I think this is an example of where, the halo slips off just a little bit and you're like, wait a minute. And Vaughn certainly thought so. He was kind of, he doesn't put that quote in unless he's a little bit like, wait, hold up. Who are we blaming here for this? So spidey sense or not, always remember, with great power comes great responsibility. And we need to make sure that we're exercising that properly.
I guess what I would say to all that is it's kind of similar to the point we made about the ALR and how the average person perceives the wider provincial government as just the government. It is, whether it is a coincidence or not, and I have no reason to doubt Dr. Bonnie Henry, and so we'll take it at face value, but there was this period in which she now says she should have acted sooner, wishes she had acted sooner during October. And then literally 48 hours after the provincial election is when they announce new restrictions. If you are not the kind of person who pays very, very close attention to the day-to-day ins and outs of provincial politics and the health briefings and all that, and granted, if you are not that person, you're probably not watching the show. But for those of you who have friends and family who might fit into that category, and I would suggest to you that the majority of British Columbians, that is a big coincidence for them to just sort of notice that we had this election that everyone knew was not strictly speaking necessary, and we were told that it's completely safe, and it apparently it was. But then 2 days later, they announce harsh new restrictions. What perception do you expect people to draw from that? What inference do you think the average person is taking from that? And it is not unreasonable to point that out as saying, okay, if you're saying it's a big coincidence, fine, but understand how that's going to look. Yeah. No,
you've said it much more succinctly and eloquently than I did. It's just, it's...
Hopefully less actionably.
Yes. I wasn't actionable.
No, I'm just kidding.
Just complaining about it. Give me a break. It's been a year of this. I'm tired of it.
I'm just teasing you. We were just talking about legal wranglings, and so it's in my head.
Yeah, we're all tired of this. Not all, but most of us are tired of this. It's been a year of this. We're up on all these year-long anniversaries. We're starting to, your Facebook memories are starting to tick up things that you're like, oh, geez, that was the last time my kid played outside for months, with other people for months. That's the last time they went laser tagging. It was a birthday for my 11-year-old just before the restrictions hit.
Sounds awesome, actually.
Yeah, well, it was. I was terrible. But anyways, I'm a big target now, and they're little speedy athletes. It's not really fair. It's so difficult. So, maybe it doesn't even matter, right? It's so long gone, but here we are again. It sounds like she's signaling she's going to reduce restrictions. And, Lord knows, I am strongly in favor of reducing restrictions. I think now we've been so long that most people are exercising their own common sense, doing their own risk management and risk calculations when they're going out. I don't think a lot of people are. No, I shouldn't say it. There are a lot of people who aren't obeying the letter of the rules anymore, but they have figured out how to get through this in a way that both balances their mental health and their family's well-being and their business interests and all these different things. So people are making those calculations for themselves. And of course they have. We've had a year of this. Like, if you haven't figured out by now that, where the riskiest parts of your life are, you never are. So Dr. Bonnie can forbid you from leaving your bedroom. You're still not, you're not going to get it, right? So I'm all for reducing restrictions. However, it seems counterintuitive, right? Because 7-day case counts are up. Hospitalizations have stabilized. Deaths are still occurring. But she's like, well, we're going to start, we'll have a plan for April for religious gatherings. Great. I'm all for that. Absolutely. We're going to, she hinted yesterday, maybe reopening sports. Great. I don't know why you closed down outdoor sports anyways. That didn't make any sense to me. But you sit there and go well, what's changed? The numbers are basically the same as they were when she brought in all the restrictions. Is it just we've accepted the fact now that there's a floor? Is it the fact that, okay, most folks in long-term care have been vaccinated now? Okay, great. But I just would like more communication from her, what the calculation is. And here's my fear. So whose spidey sense are we trusting now on opening up restrictions? Is it hers? Is it her team's? Are they all on the same page? This just opens some questions.
There are 2 books on my bookshelf about the 1918-1919 influenza epidemic, and they're both very long, and I've only read one of them all the way through. I'm busy as well. But what strikes me is how much they were learning in real time, and how still 100 years later we're still, I don't want to use the word arguing because that implies it's a fight, but there's still some disagreement about some of the key aspects of what happened. And I'm not talking about no one's debating that it was influenza, but how some areas avoided, massive outbreaks and that don't appear to be different than others. And I won't go down the rabbit hole. But I think we're going to be having these conversations about COVID-19. Our grandkids are going to be having this conversation about COVID-19 and, what prevented it in some places and why not others. And it seems to me that weather plays a pretty significant role. But there's also going to be things that we just can't explain. I mean, 2 weeks ago, people were wringing their hands about the governor of Texas, whose name escapes me, deciding that
Abbott.
The state was going to completely Greg Abbott, I think. Thank you. I almost called him George Abbott.
Yeah, don't you dare!
He completely reopened the state.
I'm
and
triggered!
People were wringing their hands saying, there's going to be debt, there's going to be blood on his hands, and people are going to die. And I have a lot of family in Texas, and so I was very concerned. It's been 2 weeks, and I hope this remains true. I'm not saying it will. I don't know. I am not an epidemiologist, and I don't play one on Twitter. But there hasn't been a big uptick in cases there. And again, I hope that continues. I'm not suggesting to you I know the reason why. I'm just saying there's a lot that we don't know. And, that's how science works. You keep poking and asking questions, and sometimes you get inferences and conclusions that you didn't expect, and sometimes don't even make sense. But we're going to be having these conversations for years and years and years and years, and there's going to be exceptions, and there's going to be things that we don't quite understand. There'll be factors that we don't even see. I'm hoping that the armchair epidemiology, the epidemic of armchair epidemiology, stops in a few months, but it probably isn't going to.
Yeah. I mean, this has been a weird virus from the beginning, right? How many times have we read stories of people who took every precaution, scrubbed down their groceries, wore them out, only went to grocery stores, and they caught it? And then people like me who, I've been coming to work every day. Now I work in a big space and we're socially distanced and then we're masked and all that. But above them all, kids are in school, kids go into hockey practice, we haven't seen it. Family members, family folks where one person will get it and it doesn't spread to the rest of them. Husbands and wives where one get it. And you're what is closer contact than a husband and a wife? Don't get me back to Dr. Bonnie's Good Times Guide. So, that is it's just such a weird thing. And, maybe 10 years from now, as research continues, they'll find that, people with this blood type or that particular gene or this genome, I don't know, this genome a thing in this situation, like there was something that
you're probably right. Yeah.
made you more
there's
kind of
plenty of
active to it.
diseases that people's genetics play an outsized role on. Sickle cell anemia only seems to affect people of African descent. I don't know why, but it's true.
So, maybe there's something that and we'll get, more kind of interest in that. Then there'll be things like the treatments. Deaths have gone down in part because we got better at treating it. Just flipping patients over onto their stomachs made a huge difference. Even the drugs that, Trump was such a fool, but, for certain people, those drugs worked. For other people, they didn't. But, they tried everything, right? Like, so there's so much left to dig out of this. I can't wait to be through the vaccinations so we can, the scientists can move from that to actually going back and figuring out, okay, how did we get here? Just finishing up on the Dr. Bonnie conversation, even though, no one's listening.
Transcribing.
Yes, transcribing. I have great respect for Dr. Bonnie. I would not want her job for $25 million. I can only imagine, I get anxious about a big meeting in the morning. I can barely sleep. She's doing this day after day after day after day after day. There's going to be fatigue. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be, especially decision fatigue. The squiggly line of restrictions. Rob had a great piece in the Orca about how the communication should be better around the restrictions. Absolutely. Yeah. Go into any restaurant. People aren't in their own little bubbles. We've moved past that as a society. We've said, no, we've calculated, we're willing to take the risk. She's done the best she can, but let's not forget the element of luck. Let's not forget the fact that Chinese Canadians in the very beginning of this pandemic in January and February were getting messages from back home saying this is big, this is scary. They were masking up at a rate that other people weren't. That helped greatly reduce that early on. Let's not lose sight of the fact that luck and other people played a big part in this. I don't know, something just did not sit right with me about blaming underlings for having different opinions and then, the Spidey sense comment. That is not the kind of leadership that we've come to expect modeled from Dr. Bonnie.
Tough to keep at that level indefinitely in real time with a whole province watching, but yes. I think we should wrap up with what is kind of a weekly segment for us, which is Jordan gives us updates on what's really happening behind the scenes with BC Liberal leadership. Because in terms of the headlines and what's public, and in terms of what I know, I literally don't think anything has changed since last week, or maybe even from the last 2 weeks, but you're about to correct me.
It's all changed. All right, well, Aaron Gunn's been on the media tour. You've seen that. He's kind of...
Yes, I have.
He went out with Smitty. He's done some other... basically, if you have a podcast out there and you need a guest, Aaron Gunn will be there. So he's everywhere.
Is he official yet? Is that something that he's actually said,
official.
Yes, I'm doing?
No, I mean, no one's really official, except Ellis.
Except Ellis, okay.
But,
that's what I thought. And even he's kind of his toes in the water. He hasn't plunged in yet.
Well, there's no paperwork to do yet or any milestones to hit, so you can't be official until you do that. But let's talk about Kevin Falcon this week. And I've been thinking about the Falcon conundrum, where he's such a prohibitive front runner in this race. He's got the team. He's got a bunch of support already built. He's got the name brand. The NDP clearly have identified him as the most likely winner. That's why Dave Eby on Eby's very low-rated podcast has a make sure you get that Dave Eby's low-rated podcast and flag it for the minister. And make sure you say Jordan was winking during it. Wink, wink. Okay. Don't kill me, Dave.
We've just been canceled.
I've just been canceled. Yeah. The Attorney General has brought out an act forbidding Maclean from podcasting with Jordan Bateman. That's a weird flex by the AG, but I guess cancel culture comes here. I've lost my train of thought. No, Eby has a segment dedicated
on Kevin Falcon.
Yeah, which is weird, right? You're the Attorney General of the province of British Columbia. Surely you have more important things to talk about than the other party's leadership race, but he just can't help himself, so there he goes. They clearly, Ravi Kahlon had a broadside on that. Judy Darcy had her op-ed fighting back against a piece that Falcon wrote pre-Christmas. So they clearly fear him. So he's the front runner. And that poses problems, because how do you be a front runner in a race like this and not have Peter McKay-itis?
Yeah.
Peter MacKay, prohibitive front runner in the Conservative Party of Canada's leadership race, but Aaron O'Toole won. MacKay got to like 40% on the first ballot and could not move forward. All these smaller, and I shouldn't say smaller, all of these candidates who are less known or less favored can kind of cross-pollinate deals. And, the fear for the Falcon campaign would be some of them sort of just kind of trickles up to the top. Falcon stalls out at 40%, and, as people drop off the ballot, their votes go and kind of reinforce the group that are running until Ellis Ross wins or someone like that. So if you're Falcon, I think here's the deal. You have a party and a party membership and a party supporters who are desperate to see the BC Liberals be relevant again. Desperate to see the party, holding Horgan to account. Desperate to see the party moving, what's the vision beyond COVID? Like, desperate to see that kind of thing. So I think for Falcons campaign, they need to be running against Horgan, not running against Ellis Ross, if that makes sense. The worst thing that can happen for the front runner is you're so far ahead, or that you kind of discount the rest of them. Gavin Dew, or Ellis Ross, or Aaron Gunn. Aaron Gunn's a big Facebook guy, big deal. Like, you kind of belittle them, even in your actions accidentally, and then they slowly coalesce and pick up steam on you because no one likes that sort of thing. And frankly, you're making it more difficult for you to lead the party once you're in, because you need to bring all those factions together. So the best way to do that is ignore them. Basically act like you're the de facto opposition leader already. Come out, we have a budget next month. The guy's a former finance minister. He should have the sharpest, most intelligent critique of Selena Robinson's first budget of any commentator in British Columbia. That should be like, they should be ready to go. This is, the minister has fallen down here, here, and here. Still only $10 million for mental health and addictions. We need to do more for, small businesses. Like, come out with a very sharp, almost a shadow budget that you can go forward and try to pick up some press like that. And the BC Liberal members will see that. Question period is great. I enjoy hearing about it on Capital Direct and on this show and all those good things. But question period doesn't resonate with
weekly segments.
Yeah, it doesn't resonate with the average British Columbian, right? Like, none of us are sitting there like eating popcorn, like, oh, I can't believe question period. And, oh, Mike DeYoung got a question. Woo, good job, MDJ. No, no one's doing that. Unfortunately, believe me, as someone who wrote the Q piece for a brief period of time, no one cares. So, we have to go, and the party has to get beyond that. And the way to do it is to take on the premier head on. The media will then kind of reflex to being like, oh, I wonder what the Falcon campaign thinks about this law. I wonder what the Falcon campaign thinks about this particular scandal. I wonder what the Falcon campaign thinks about this. And, the person who loses in that is Shirley Bond, who's done an outstanding job as interim party leader and will continue to be a force there. But, at least then Falcon's campaign isn't outright like campaigning against Michael Lee. It's more about looking forward. I think that's probably the way to go. That would be my sense. And judging from some of the conversations I had with Team Falcon, it seems like that's where they're headed. So we'll see. I mean, who knows? Maybe it doesn't matter. Like, maybe, he's got this thing locked down already, and it's, we're just spending a year prepping Kevin to come back into public life. But
I don't think anything can be locked down in BC politics in a year out. But yeah, your points are well taken on overall strategy. Everyone says he's the front runner, and I'm not disputing that, but I don't see him being so far ahead of the rest of the field that it's like it's not even a contest. I don't see that yet, at least, anyway. We'll see. Your comparison to Peter MacKay, just in terms of the numbers, is probably, to me, from the outside, what it looks like, it seems more accurate, where Peter MacKay sort of started at 40 and stayed at 40. I'm not suggesting Kevin Falcon would be staying at 40, but people are talking like he's at 75 out of 100, and I we'll see. I guess I could be surprised. I've been surprised before.
I don't think he's that like. He's a prohibitive front runner though. Like, let's list off the names: Val Litwin, Ellis Ross, Mike Lee, Aaron Gunn, Gavin Dew, Renee Merrifield, Mike Morris, Tom Shapitka. Am I missing anyone?
I
don't think so.
I don't think so. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 candidates. Put together at this point, are they equal? Does Falcon have 40% in the party? 45? Like, this is a tough hill for those 8 to climb. And really it's going to come down to what kind of relationship, Renee Merrifield has with Mike Lee and Alice Ross and how those votes cross-pollinate. You'll have the anyone but Kevin faction, front-runner-itis.
Yeah.
And, so I think it's fair to say, judging from the organizers and that Kevin is the favorite now, you would not get very good odds if you were betting on him because it feels locked down.
I didn't mean to dispute that he's a favorite. I just meant there are some who are talking about him like he's at 80 and everyone else together is at 20. That I don't see.
Yeah.
But him being at 40, 45 and everyone else collectively making up that 50 to 60. That makes perfect sense to me at this moment in time.
Yeah, I did talk to I shouldn't name drop on here. I was talking to Hamish Marshall the other day, and he and I are both fascinated by the Aaron Gunn candidacy simply because we have like I've said before, we have no sense as to whether or not you can bring social media followers and turn them into members of a party.
Yeah.
It's never been that. And I think we've talked about this too. As I watched Andrew Cuomo flame out in New York, I do wonder if an AOC could AOC run for governor? That would be an interesting thing. And if so, she would be the kind of person who would be kind of taking that social media following writ large, and can you translate it into actual Democratic votes in a primary? This is our little version of that. As someone who spends a lot of time on social media, unfortunately, I'm very curious about how that would work out. Hamish, who does not spend a lot of time on social media, also very curious about whether or not that can be transferred over. And I imagine no one is more curious than Aaron Gunn, whose whole candidacy would be staked on somehow converting Facebook likes into $10 memberships.
That's true. Every single one of them. You'd need them all, probably. We'll see. I guess we'll find out in a year.
Yeah. That's the other thing. We have all this time. We have a lot of time. So, by the way, those of you working on leadership campaigns, feel free to DM me. My DMs are open at Jordan Bateman on Twitter. I'm always looking for random content and thoughts to put in here to impress Maclean with my how I've got my finger on the pulse of the BC Liberal leadership race.
Well, so he's been doing it so far, and it actually is a good segment to have at the end of every show with especially before there's official news. Stuff's coming out here a couple weeks before it's public, and that's fantastic.
That's right. Yeah, tune in here for all your scoops. Capital Direct's news from next week already here today.
And on that shot across the bow at the other show I do from this very chair, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.